Hello, hello. Welcome back to Leading Women in Tech. I'm your host, Toni Collis, and today I'm talking to a very special lady, Angie Read. Angie had a 25-year career in corporate communications, working in a variety of companies, including big tech. She was viewed as extremely resilient, and she had to be, in her words, because of the role she had. And then at 46 years old, she suffered a massive ischemic stroke. She went back to work after just a few months of rehab, and in her own words, because of guilt, she shouldn't have done. But what hit her was life-changing, debilitating anxiety and depression. It wasn't just the stroke that changed her life. It was what happened as a result of her own guilt. And today, Angie is taking us on this journey as she forces herself to go back through her career that wasn't building fulfillment, what she decided to do when she was finally laid off, recognizing the signs of a mental health crisis, and how it can hit any of us immediately, not just because you've had something genuinely horrendous like Angie's stroke. What can we do about anxiety and the cost of perfectionism, as well as understanding that perfectionism is not a badge of honor? Angie talks about resilience and why she was so resilient and why she needed to be super strong, and why now she approaches her mental health as her number one job. There is so much to learn from Angie's story, whether you have had a stroke, some other major physical health crisis, or none of that, and you're just looking at your life and evaluating your stress, your anxiety, your perfectionism, and your career. So without further ado, let's get Angie and her wise words of wisdom onto the show. Welcome to the show, Angie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I love being here.
I'm thrilled to dig into this, and particularly your background. So let's start off with who you are today, how you got to where you are today, particularly the highlights and lowlights, and why you do what you now do.
Yes. So today I am an author and I'm a life coach helping stroke survivors, primarily female stroke survivors, to reclaim their confidence and move forward with purpose in their lives. And the reason I do this, and I haven't done this for all my life. Most of my professional career was spent in corporate communications and public relations. And I've worked for different size agencies around the world and also big brands. And some of those brands were tech brands. But corporate communications, PR, and marketing were really my area of expertise. And I was excelling in those things. I had had almost a 25-year career in those things until I was stopped in my tracks. So at the age of 46, I suffered a massive ischemic stroke. I had two clots, one in my neck and one in my brain, that caused the entire left side of my body to be paralyzed. It happened as I was waking up one morning, just getting up, like normal, wanting to get up and go take a shower and get ready for work. Just as a normal 46-year-old woman in the prime of her career would do. And I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't know at the moment why I couldn't. It's just when everything's paralyzed on a side of your body, you can't feel anything. So it's just the weirdest sensation. There was no pain. There was nothing. But in trying to get up, I was moving the bed kind of awkwardly, and my husband woke up and asked what I was doing. I said I was trying to get up and take a shower, and he asked me if I was drunk, because I was not making sense. And of course, I said, no, I'm not drunk. It's 6:30 in the morning. He got up, he turned on the light. He looked at me and he said, the left side of your face looks like it's melting off. I think you're having a stroke. I'm calling 911. And I immediately said, no, don't do that. I'm sure I'm fine. Luckily, he did not listen to me and he called 911, because when you're having a stroke, every second counts, because every second equals brain loss. And I was lucky. I got to the EMT. The EMTs came very, very quickly. I got to the hospital so quickly. They assessed what was going on, and I immediately got in to have brain surgery, where they went in and retrieved the clots from my neck and my brain. And because we caught it so quickly, I was able to avoid lasting major difficult disabilities, physical disabilities. I was ready to go back to work after a couple of months of rehabilitation. I said, okay, I don't look like a stroke survivor. I don't have a limp. I walk unassisted. I talk unassisted. You can't tell by looking at me anymore. I mean, it took a little while for the face droop to go away, but I went back to work way too early. I went back after 7 weeks. I should have taken my entire 12-week disability leave, but I was feeling guilty. I was feeling like most of us feel like we got to get back to work. We're invaluable. We got to get back. And I rushed too quickly. When I got back to work, I was hit with debilitating anxiety and depression. I didn't know what was happening to me at the time, but I just couldn't do my job as usual. Some of the words on the page weren't quite making sense. I had just written and published my first book. It was called Marketing to Gen Z, and it was a marketing book. And I was talking about a topic I was fascinated by. And my book had just come back from the publisher with some edits. It was the first round. I was trying to edit the book. The words on the page just weren't making as much sense to me as they had before the stroke. And I attributed it to being brain damage from the stroke. And I thought, well, gosh, something's wrong with me. I can't do this. And my heightened anxiety just kept going and going. My depression really, really kicked in. Ended up having to go on disability leave again because of my mental health issues. I had to be hospitalized 2 times for my mental health issues because I was in crisis. I honestly wanted to take my own life. I was able, luckily, to survive all that, to go through a ton of counseling, a ton of therapy, had to be put on different medications. It took a little while to get the combination right. It took probably a couple of years. And I got back to kind of who I was or who I thought I needed to be because I always put that self-pressure on myself. And I went back to work in corporate communications and marketing, public relations. And I did okay once, my brain had kind of settled in. I did okay. It just wasn't as fulfilling as it had been in the past. And I tried 3 different jobs. I ended up leaving voluntarily from 2 jobs. And then this last September, I was laid off from a major tech mobile company. And that layoff really, honestly, it just opened the door for me because I said, okay, I'm forcing myself to try to go back to my career as I was and doing what I was doing before, but I no longer find the fulfillment in the hustle and bustle and it wasn't filling my cup, let's say. And I felt like I had more to say and more to give. And so I took that layoff as a sign that it was time for me to follow a passion. And that passion is helping other female stroke survivors get on with their life, move forward, get their confidence back. Because honestly, my confidence hit rock bottom after my stroke.
Yeah. I think you talk about passion there. And part of my job is to help women find their passion, ideally in the tech industry, because my mission is to elevate the tech industry, but sometimes that is outside like you. But let me just take you back a moment. Prior to your stroke, you had, by any definition, immense success in your career. What do you wish you'd known then that you only know as a result of having your stroke? Like, what do you wish you'd known before all this happened that you now know?
Well, there's a lot of things I wish I had known, but one of them that I got from Mel Robbins. I love Mel Robbins. I think she is so inspirational, and I love watching her videos on YouTube and just reading her books. And one of them, she says, is it's not that deep. So really, if you look at every area of your life, your career, it's not that deep. And to know that you should not necessarily link your full identity with what you do for a living. Because if that is taken away from you unexpectedly, and you are left with nothing else, who are you? How do you identify? How can you identify yourself beyond your career? And then I actually wrote a book about it, Identity Crisis, You Are Not Your Career. Because at the time I had my stroke, I really didn't have like a lot of other hobbies or other outside interests. I'm a mom. My kids were a little bit older when I had my stroke. My youngest was in middle school. My oldest was going into college. So it's not like I had little kids at home that needed me day in and day out constantly. So I didn't feel like I had anything besides my career. I was so enmeshed in my career that really it's mostly what mattered to me in my life. And then when that was gone, I was so lost. So it's find out who you are outside of your career, because you are not your career.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I do believe that we can all really thrive in our roles. And it's something I'm very passionate about, is not necessarily being identified with our career, but having what I view as real synergy between what we do and for our career and our identity. But to me, they aren't one and the same, because as you say, if your career is taken away from you, and the classic is one thing we can all hope for rather than your experience is retirement. And I see a lot of women that I work with are fearful of retirement when they get close to it. There's this, I'm excited about it, and then they get close to it, and this fear, because it's, well, who am I then? And I'm like, well, ideally, early on, we're fully aligned. Our career lines up with our identity, but our career is not our identity. And I think there's a very subtle difference there. So to me, my personal mission in life is leaving the world in a better place than I found it. There are so many ways I could do that. My current company is one of many, many ways I could do that. But that's my identity, not my business. And prior to this, it wasn't my job. It was my mission in the world is to leave the world in a better place than I found it. That to me is my identity. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Like, what is it that you think helps people find an identity that's not work related when it's the thing we spend most time doing?
I think it's a luxury a lot of people don't have. I mean, many of us go into a career because of the money or because of the opportunities for advancement and just for security. So a lot of people don't follow their passion and some people don't even know what their passion is, or may not feel like they even have a passion. And honestly, that's okay. That most of us on this planet don't feel like we have something that we're passionate about, but that's something you can develop. And I challenge people to craft an introduction for themselves. Say you go into a room of a bunch of people you don't know, and it's not a work networking event, but it's just, maybe it's a wedding. I don't know. It's something of a group of people that you don't know. How do you introduce yourself? Do you say, I'm a partner at such and such firm. I do this. Or do you talk about who you are, what you're passionate about as a person? It's very challenging. It's a really challenging assignment to even think through, let alone implement. But you go into a group of people and naturally you tell them what you do for a living first. And so, if you have a very hard time not doing that you're probably more enmeshed with your career than you think you are. It's great if you can align it to your passions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we can all find passion. Maybe that's not my optimism in life. It's what we aim for around here in the work that I do. But I think it is very sad that so many of us don't have passion, which actually brings me to my next question for you, where I want to talk about mental health and resilience. Resilience is what I really want to dig into. I mean, I sort of hope that we don't have many listeners who've experienced a stroke, but I also know, statistically speaking, many of the women I have had the privilege to work with will at some point have a debilitating physical health crisis, or mental health crisis for that matter. And what I really want to dig into with you is what you've had to do to help yourself go through that. As you said, you went back to work too soon because of your guilt, which is a mental health thing in the first place, in my opinion. And that led to debilitating anxiety and depression, or maybe that was there and it was exacerbated. I don't know. But what do you wish you did differently? What do you want everybody else to hear about building resilience and mental health, either prior to something like this happening or at the time it happens?
So the first step is recognizing the signs of having a mental health issue or crisis, hoping you catch it before it becomes a crisis, it's a slippery slope. I mean, it can hit you so immediately. And I didn't have those issues before my stroke. I had a little anxiety and I was on a low dose anxiety medication, like most of us are. I mean, a lot of us are anyway. But the stroke changed the biochemistry of my brain, and it caused post-stroke anxiety and post-stroke depression. And those are very common conditions among stroke survivors, yet nobody's talking about it. But what I would say is, honestly, do not hesitate to get help. When you're starting to feel anxiety, it can feel like, you maybe feel like you're having a heart attack if you're having a panic attack, or a shortness of breath, or just that life is too heavy. And also, being a perfectionist is not a badge of honor. It will create anxiety. Being a perfectionist is the front door to anxiety. And I had been a perfectionist my whole life. Now I say I'm a recovering perfectionist. I don't think we ever are completely not a perfectionist anymore, but I know how it fuels my anxiety, and I have to keep it in check. And just also to know, like depression, some people just imagine depression as you're just sad and you're having some down days and you're blue. We all get the blues. We all are sad. It's a normal emotion to have. And it's okay to recognize your sadness, but you can't stay there. And when it lasts for days or weeks on end, or in my case, months on end, and it interferes with your daily living, it interferes with your job, your life, you have to get help. For me, depression did not look like crying all the time, did not look like sadness. For me, depression was flatness. I say my affect went from being a really bubbly person, with a ton of personality, to being nothing. I was like a shell of myself. I was so flat. Nothing brought me joy. Absolutely nothing. Not my kids, not the holidays. It was happening right at the holidays. I couldn't even get the strength to decorate a Christmas tree, or even wrap presents. I put all the presents in bags because I didn't have the energy. I didn't have the drive. That is what depression looked like for me. Everyone, it can look slightly different, but get immediate help. Do not think that you're strong enough to manage these conditions on your own. As women, a lot of times we try to be the super strong ones that, nothing's going to take me down. I can figure this out. Intellectually, I can figure this out. Yeah. How I did that was knowing, my sisters luckily jumped in and helped, and my husband, and said, you need help. We need to get you some help, because this is not Angie. This is not who you were before your stroke. Something happened. And so I got immediate help. I had to be hospitalized, like I said. But after the hospitalization for mental health issues, you have to continue to do the work. So it's not going to cure you just because you spent 5 days in a mental health institution. Nope, that's just to get you through the crisis and out the other side. But they try to set you up with resources so that you have a psychiatrist and perhaps are on medications to mitigate some of the issues. But the medication will not solve it alone. And this is what my psychiatrist told me is so, so important, is that you are part of the equation. So you have to put in the work. The medicine might do 70% of the work, but the other 30% is based on you and your actions. So I sought talk therapy. I did extensive talk therapy. In fact, I was in an intensive outpatient program for 12 weeks. That was 3 nights a week, 3 hours at a time. So it was 9 hours a week of intense group therapy. I did that 3 nights a week for 12 weeks. And then in between, I went to see a talk therapist on my own twice a week. It was intense. It was like a full-time job, because I approached my mental health like my number one job. I had to keep myself alive, and that became my priority. And that has to be your priority too, is to stay alive and to stay strong and have good mental health. And so much of it was really actions I took, like exercising, eating right, getting plenty of sleep, staying hydrated. There are lots of things we can do to manage our own mental health, and jump in before it becomes a crisis. Because when you're in crisis mode, when you're starting to think those really, really dark thoughts, your brain is lying to you, and unfortunately, it's so easy to believe those lies when you're in the middle of a crisis.
Yeah, 100%. I really hope anyone listening to this is not in the state you were in. But if you are, please listen to Angie's advice here and go and get that help. I'm hopeful that very few people are. Maybe that's naive on my part and the over-optimistic side of me. But I do want to rewind a little bit, because you mentioned a couple of things there, which I see on a daily basis with the women I work with. Perfectionism is a badge of honor. We kind of know it's not helpful, but it is a badge of honor. You also talked about, as women, we try to be super strong. And I would call that as a badge of honor as well. And then I also see crippling anxiety again, I mean, I personally experienced this. I was a chronic worrier, is what I would say. I worried about everything. I worried about being worried. And I did not realize how bad my anxiety was until I dealt with it. As a business owner, I had to deal with it. And I realized if I dealt with that a decade ago, I could have avoided so many issues. I might not be running my own business if I dealt with it a decade ago, because other things would have got better instead. So I don't regret it, but at the same time, I didn't need to go through that. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's something that every single listener, there's probably some perfectionism or some anxiety or some, I can be super strong as a woman and figure this out, whether that's about a mental health challenge or something else. It's what I call the superwoman complex. It's our job to fix it, right? Quite often that comes from imposter syndrome. And I feel like if we worked on that, I'm not saying that if somebody had a stroke, they wouldn't go through what you went through, because as you said, there are real physiological changes with the stroke. But I feel like there's so much more all of us should be doing. And I'd love to hear your take on that. Like, do you wish you'd done this work 10 years ago before it hit crisis point?
That's a tough one to answer. I was seeking therapy when I felt like I needed it throughout my life. When I had, something horrible happen, like the death of a parent or something really upsetting to my family. So therapy was not new to me. I wish I had just taken a little bit better care of my own health, like health overall. My stroke, they think, was caused by birth control and being a migraine sufferer. When you go down the list of the common risk factors for stroke, those are not the ones you think of. You think of high cholesterol, high blood pressure, smoker, our family history. I didn't have any of those things. I was 100%, or I felt like I was 100% healthy, as a 46-year-old. But there's, I think stress, if I could pinpoint, I would think stress played a big part. So yes, managing stress. So there's a difference between being stressed and having anxiety. A clinical anxiety diagnosis is not just something that you can meditate through. It is something that you typically need some chemical help, medication help, for the most part. At least I did when you have clinical anxiety. But you're, like you said, the worrying about worry. So you're on this hamster wheel of worry and you can't get off. So how do you stop that excessive thinking and constantly being worried? One thing to keep in mind is, again, I go back to that Mel Robbins, it's not that deep. It just is not. It's not that deep. It's just a job. I don't care if you love it. I don't care if you're making millions. It's still just a job. And typically, unless you are an ER doctor or an ER nurse, it's not an emergency. Typically in our lives and what we're doing for work, it's not life or death most of the time. So if you can remember that and just try to put things into perspective and just take a step back, find ways to relieve the stress. If you're not able to sleep at night, that's a big indication that something is off balance. So when you can understand how the balance of your body might be off, it's to really not just ignore those warning signs, because those warning signs are a warning of something much bigger to come. And I do believe stress played a huge role in my stroke, because I was constantly stressed. I used to think, when they say list what are your positives, whatever your negatives are, I'm not saying it right, in a job interview. I would always say, well, the answer, it's both a positive and a negative, right? That I'm a perfectionist because I'm constantly pushing myself to be perfect. And, that it is the front door to anxiety. And we're human beings, we're flawed. We make mistakes. So learn to live with your mistakes and to value mistakes as stepping stones to progress. So don't look at a mistake as a failure. It's called failing forward. And if we could just all take a step back and recognize that we're doing the best we can, and that is enough, that, maybe you can take a big sigh, a big breath, and have that relief to know that, it's not that deep. It just isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think that failing forward is absolutely key to letting go of perfectionism and also embracing what then happens as a result of letting go of that perfectionism. Because I do think there's a two-pronged thing. It's being ready to put something out there that's not perfect, but then also how do you deal with the consequences in your mind of it not being perfect? But let's talk about something else that I know that happened, having, from your books. You talk about how you found yourself with less emotional regulation at work, and it wasn't on brand, as you put it.
Yeah.
Why was this not your brand? Why did it matter? And how do you wish you had returned to work, if at all? Like what was going on there with your emotional regulation, and what do you wish had happened differently?
One of the side effects of having a stroke that a lot of people don't know is emotional dysregulation. So it's not being able to control your emotions. A lot of stroke survivors will cry uncontrollably for no reason or at very inappropriate times, or will laugh uncontrollably at very inappropriate times, maybe at a funeral or something. I mean, they're not thinking about it. It's how your brain is responding to the situation. And it's so hard for family and loved ones of stroke survivors to kind of live with that and learn how to manage that, because sometimes a stroke survivor might lash out and be very nasty and very, jump at you and say mean things. And it's not in their control. They don't want to react that way. For me, I just found myself so much shorter with my colleagues and my bosses. If somebody brought a challenge to me or something to give me some positive or some positive reinforcement, or to push me on something that I needed to do better, I wasn't able to just kind of absorb that, sit with it, and decipher it and work through it. I was kind of jumpy and just very snappy, and it was just not the way I was before my stroke. I used to think that I could be pretty self-regulated, although honestly, I probably have always been just a tiny bit hot-headed. I think after my stroke, I just had a little bit harder of a time keeping it in check. And I sometimes embarrassed myself by just getting really snappy and really loud when pushed. And because it was like, you don't understand, I'm working as hard as I can, but still you're pushing me and challenging me. My brain is challenged enough. You need to lay off, back off. You don't understand.
Yeah.
I was working in a job, and I'm not going to name any names, but at the time, my middle son was going through a mental health crisis. I was trying to keep him alive. He was suicidal, and it was something that I had to live with day in and day out for a couple of straight weeks. And of course, I had to take that with me to work a little bit. People were asking what was going on with me, and I was honest, because I thought it will help people to understand me if they know that I'm going through this. And I was basically told, you need to compartmentalize that. Don't bring that into work. And I went off, because how ridiculous is that? You cannot compartmentalize your love for your children and being a parent and going through something like that. Screw you. That is not right. And I did. I went off. I said some choice words and got myself kind of into trouble. But, it's emotional dysregulation. So it's a common stroke condition.
I mean, I think one of the things that really struck me when we were talking previously was how you had such good emotional regulation before the stroke. One of the things I talk about in terms of executive presence is that emotional regulation, but also a balance. As you just said, there are certain times when, you are a human being, and some of that is going to come to work with you, right? Yeah. And I think if we've got good emotional regulation, we get those kind of credits in the bank that we can use, and people understand, as long as we're upfront, like, hey, I'm not in a good place. Why was it so important to you before the stroke to have that personal brand, as you put it, of this really great executive presence, from what I'm hearing?
Yes, it was important, because to have an executive position, to be in a position of leadership, you need to lead by example. And I wanted to be an even-keeled, objective boss. I wanted to be very even-tempered and lead by example, with being calm and not having everything rise to crisis level, because not everything at work, and really most things are not a crisis. So it was stay even keeled, especially because I worked in advertising and marketing and PR, and I worked at some big agencies, and the tensions are always running so high, and you're trying to run around to satisfy all your clients, and it always feels like an emergency. It always feels like everything is a priority. When everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. And I think that's what I was trying to, to be as a leader, and who I wanted as. I didn't used to think about my personal brand, but it's how you want to be portrayed. And that's kind of what I wanted. So
it's actually fascinating listening to that, because I actually view that kind of behavior as helping us to be more resilient, provided you don't have the perfectionism piece.
Yes.
Do you think that helped you with your resilience prior to the stroke? And do you think having some understanding of that was maybe some grace needed about letting go of the emotional regulation, but do you think it's helped you at all with your resilience?
I do. I think the way I've always just approached my life, my career, being, a thoughtful, smart woman, thinking things through, thinking of solutions, not problems. I think that helped play into being resilient. It's what I've known my entire life. I have a lot of other things, just like all of us, that I've gone through throughout my life that have challenged me and pushed me and forced me to be resilient. That I wish, hadn't happened to me, but because they did, I've just been able to develop resilience and a little bit more, strength throughout the years than maybe if those things hadn't happened to me.
Yeah. I'd love to ask you one final question before we move on to the quickfire round around resilience more generally and thriving. If you had to give women who are going through what you went through when you first had your stroke, whether that's a stroke or something else they're going through, what do you wish those women to know? What advice would you give them?
Things will get better. You will improve. It just takes time and patience. It's so hard to have patience when you've just never had to have it before. But just give yourself time and grace. Just take little steps forward, because it will always add up to success in the end. It's baby steps. But just really to give yourself grace. We're not good at giving ourselves grace. We're just not.
Yeah. You know what? I wish all of us knew that, even if we're not coming through a physical crisis right now. Actually, I wish that was
every
something we all
day
got
we
taught
should
at
give
school.
ourselves grace. And treat yourself like 100%. You would treat your best friend. Like, take yourself outside of your body for a second and treat yourself like your own best friend. There's so many things that we say to ourselves in our heads that we would never say to our best friend. So just imagine that and try to have that perspective when you're dealing with hard things.
100%. Well, let's move on to the quickfire round, especially the first question of the quickfire round is always gives me a bit of a chuckle. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever been given?
Fake it till you make it. I hate that. There is nothing good that comes from faking anything. Be your authentic self. Don't fake it till you make it. That's just, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
Oh, so funny.
Don't fake it till you make it.
I've actually got an episode on the problem with fake it till you make it. It's one of those things. There's something in there which is people are trying to get at, but it is so damaging in so many respects. So I completely agree with you there. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Always be yourself, because nobody else is like you. And usually people love you for who you are, not who you pretend you are. And when you're your authentic self, you will find your passion. You will, be able to bring authenticity to the conversation, authenticity to the table. And that's so needed, especially today in the business world, is authenticity and being your genuine self. Yeah.
100%. Yes, 100%. What is the last book you read, and would you recommend it?
Yeah, right now I'm kind of reading 3 books at once, I'm not deep into all of them, but I'm reading The Book of Awakenings by Mark Nepo. I'm reading 5-Second Rule by Mel Robbins. I'm a huge Mel Robbins fan. And then I'm reading, 2 nonfiction and 1 fiction. I'm reading something called Vacation Rental, and it's a really great book. I just found it because it was listed on my Kindle Unlimited, and I love my Kindle Unlimited. I just kind of pick my books based on what's next in that list. But I always love to read a little bit of fiction plus some nonfiction, just to, to improve myself. And I'm not good at reading too many books at once, but usually with self-help or nonfiction, you can read just bits and pieces at a time. But then I get really sucked into fiction because I love like make believe.
I'm right there with you. I always have several books in the go, and it's always a fiction book and a couple of non-fictions, and I'm terrible for like digging into them. I do try and finish them off because you're right. It's like it's building us up. So I love that. I will make sure that links to all three of those books, as well as Angie's books, are in the show notes if you're listening and are curious. But Angie, one final question. Well, actually, I've got a couple more about where to find you and stuff, but final kind of like deep question. What is your favorite mindset tip for listeners of today's episode? What do you wish they were all doing differently?
Is really think about where you're coming from. Do you have a growth mindset or do you have a fixed mindset? And it's really important to cultivate a growth mindset so that you can continue to grow and learn and evolve. If you have a fixed mindset, you basically believe that your innate talents and skills cannot be changed. They're something that either you were born with or that's what you have and that's what you're limited to now. And so that could hold you back. A growth mindset will show you that you can grow and change and learn and evolve, and that will help push you forward. It doesn't mean that you constantly have to be seeking that next promotion or anything like that. It's just as a person, are you growing and evolving and being the best you can be? So it's really beautiful. Understanding and dig in, do a little bit of research into what a fixed mindset is and a growth mindset, and then do some exercises to help develop your own growth mindset. That's something I work on with my coaching clients.
Oh, 100%. I mean, having the growth mindset, I think, is the biggest game changer we can make. And as you say, it is something that you can develop. It just because you have a fixed mindset doesn't mean you can't change that. Right. So listeners,
it is something we can learn. It's a learned skill. Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. Angie, this has been beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your passion, and your personal story, which is very it's heartbreaking and also heartwarming all at the same time. So how can people find out more about you and what you do?
My website is legacycoachingforher.com. And you can see my books. I've written 4 books since my first book. I've written 4 books since my stroke and based in my recovery, but several of them would be good for anyone, not just stroke survivors. I wrote Mental Health Hacks, 10 Easy Hacks to Help Manage Anxiety and Depression. And anybody could benefit. It's a little booklet. It's only 40 pages long. I made it really quick and simple so that somebody in crisis could have the capacity to absorb it and implement. And then I wrote Identity Crisis, You Are Not Your Career. It was based on me having my identity or my career ripped away from me unexpectedly, or so I thought. And it was all that I learned in that. And it's useful to anybody, you know, whether you're retiring, whether you're going back to work for the first time, whatever. Anybody who really enmeshes themselves with their career to learn how to kind of untangle that. And then my latest book is called Rise, Mastering the Art of Resilience. You know, I used to get so angry when people, would mention how resilient I am and say, oh, you're not the most resilient person I've ever met. And I mean, I've had people tell me that. And it used to make me angry because it's like, you don't understand. I'm only resilient because I have to be. I was forced to be. I don't want to be resilient. I want to just have a calm, normal, easy life. But now I wear it as a badge of honor. I really do, because resilience is so important now more than ever. I mean, when we were during the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, everyone was talking about resilience and the resilience of the human spirit or resilience of workforces. And that was all so true. But honestly, it's individual resilience that matters the most. How do you bounce back and move forward from something that's hit you like a ton of bricks, that maybe has, upset your own apple cart in life? How do you move forward? How do you not be defined by that and move forward? So I'm really, really proud of all 4 of my books. You can find those on my website. You can learn more about my life coaching on my website. And that's where you can find my information. legacycoachingforher.com.
Perfect. I will make sure that link is in the show notes. If you're listening and you want to go check out Angie and her books, please do head over to the show notes and you'll get the link for that. Angie, final thoughts. Any final thoughts you would like to leave listeners with today?
Yes. And I think this is really important. I love telling people this because it sometimes shocks them, but your brain believes what you tell it. And so tell your brain, our brains don't know the difference between true and false or real and imaginary. Our brains believe what we tell it repeatedly. So repeatedly tell your brain, fill your brain. And this is not a Pollyanna approach to life. This is deliberate action to every day tell your brain positive things about yourself. And they could be aspirational statements. So I always start my day with meditation, and then I do some gratitudes. And then I do I am statements. And sometimes they're aspirational, like I'm a successful businesswoman. I'm, whatever it is, but it's always those things that I aspire to be. I am strong. I am brave. I am doing important things. I'm helping a lot of people. You have to fill your brain with these positive things on repeat, because repeatedly telling your brain these things will change the chemistry of your brain. If it's one thing I've learned from having a stroke, is that your brain is the most resilient organ there is. You'll never get those cells back that died in your stroke, but your brain neuroplasticity will create new neural connections around your scar tissue, and you can approach your life the same way and your career the same way. Feed your brain what it needs to believe that you have what you need to accomplish what you want.
I love that. Feed your brain what it needs to accomplish what you want. So beautiful. Angie, thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your very personal story, for being out there helping other survivors of stroke, and hopefully also giving my audience a flavor of what's possible should the worst happen, whether it's a stroke or something else, and giving us all hope that something like this isn't the end, but actually it's potentially a new beginning. So thank you from the bottom of my heart on behalf of me and my listeners. And listeners, remember, as always, stay in your tech leadership game, follow your dreams, because the world really does need that uniqueness that you bring as a leading woman in tech.